All right, well, I'll go ahead and get us kicked off. We're gonna do a bit of housekeeping and whatnot to just get started, lay out some kind of ground rules for the evening, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Bartels and we'll get started with the bulk of the presentation. Thanks everyone for joining. Really excited to have you here. I say all the time this is my favorite event that we do each year, which I know it seems weird to have like a favorite student debt event. It seems like a very odd thing, but I really do enjoy getting to talk with the new grads about all of the changes that have happened and what's going on with your student loans. So we've got myself and Jordan Benchia, the executive director of the VIN Foundation. We'll be kind of answering questions in the background and helping out with things. You can ask questions in the Q&A if you don't mind. Leave the chat open for any like technical issues, or if Tony asks some questions and you've got responses, you can use the chat for that. But we try to use the Q&A for any questions throughout the presentation. You can ask anonymously in that Q&A if you prefer that. And then we can also upvote questions in that Q&A. That way we kind of know which ones are the most sort of pressing questions, most prominent questions that everybody has. And we'll be able to sort of answer those a little bit more quickly or live throughout the session. And then we'll also answer questions at the end as well. So plenty of time to ask questions throughout. We'll be sending out the recording of this webinar in the next couple of days. So everyone that registered, you'll receive an email from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. It'll have the recording. It'll have Tony's Prezi that he's going to use this evening as well, including all of the links and everything that we'll go through, as well as some other helpful information. So keep an eye out for that. It'll come from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. And with that, I say let's kick this thing off and start diving into the information.
All right, let's do it. Thank you, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. My voice is a little bit trash. I spent about 4 hours with the CSU third years today talking about internships and student loans and finance. So just happened that it fell on the same day as the new grad playbook. So we're going to now switch gears and talk about what you need to do with your student loans as a 2024 graduate, which is probably the most complicated start to repayment that I have ever seen. So lucky you, you happen to be right in the midst of a number of actively changing components of the student loan repayment system. There are certain things that you still have the ability to take advantage of, certain things that are extremely time sensitive, meaning like 5 days you have to act here. And so we're going to kind of triage this a bit, right? So we're going to present it first in terms of the base level information that you need to understand your student loans and get started with student loan repayment, but then make sure that we identify or help to identify those that would be in that position to potentially act before the end of this month if you're in the right set of circumstances. And Beck and I have already seen some of you on the student debt message boards, and we're working on getting responses to you so you can chew on that over this weekend and decide whether or not you want to try to get in before the April 30th deadline. But then there's also some of you who are in what we've been calling the Pickle that might try to use pay as you earn before it gets phased out on July 1st of this summer. So we're going to talk about all of that. So some really interesting deadlines that make getting started in repayment a little bit more challenging. But overall, you've got some really good benefits available to you, and that's kind of where I'm going to, I think, start first, is the secret to federal student loan repayment, right? So try to maybe take some of the edge off here. Your balance is going to go away one way or another, right? You're going to pay your balance to zero in some cases before you reach forgiveness. Even if you're using one of the income-driven plans, you can hit a zero balance before you reach forgiveness, or you will reach forgiveness, right? Either pathway is fine. So either one results in you being done with student loan repayment. You're going to see this a lot tonight too. I've been trying to drive this point home. Your federal student loans are the most flexible but annoying debt you'll ever have, right? And if we can minimize the annoying
Hey,
parts,
Tony.
we can. Yep.
At some point, your screen share stopped.
Oh, really? Interesting. Let me see if it says I'm still screen sharing. Let me stop it and restart it again. You
That's
see it
it.
now?
You
Okay.
got it.
All right. So your federal student loans are the most flexible but annoying debt you'll ever have. So our goal here is to help reduce the annoying parts so you can benefit from the flexible parts, right? And not and reduce the impact that they have to your overall finances. The key is to not pay more than you're required to pay, right? A lot of you, it kind of tempers as you get where you are now, facing repayment and, knowing what your budget's going to look like. But, most of you have some pretty aggressive intentions to pay back your student loans. We really want to make sure that those intentions match our financial reality, right? So making sure that we're not paying more than our income requires us to pay, and even more so making sure that we're not sacrificing other more critical areas of our financial wellness just to pay more than our income requires towards our student loan. So that's the secret to student loan repayment, at least from a financial standpoint, right? The repayment options that are out there and available are extremely beneficial. They're very confusing, right? But they can be very beneficial, particularly as you're just getting started. Whether your student debt to income ratio is very high or very low, these income-driven plans can be an excellent way to get started in repayment as you're getting your career kicked off as a veterinarian. So starting with a plan makes a lot of sense, right? So knowing your student debt, we can't manage what we don't measure. So we're going to look at our student loans tonight in great detail and look at what it's telling us. Seeing that will lead to what repayment options we have available. So it'll help you understand whether or not you're in what we've been calling the pickle and might need to act before pay as you earn is phased out, or maybe you're not in the pickle, which I expect a majority of you to be. We'll find that out, which means you don't necessarily have to act as fast, but you still want to focus on getting your loans consolidated and into an income-driven plan relatively soon after you graduate. And choosing that repayment plan, I've already kind of alluded to it. Save is probably going to be the best one for you. For some of you, if you can get your loans into pay as you earn, that's great too, before it's phased out. And we'll talk about how you can, look at the differences there, right? So if you're in that, what I've been calling pickle, knowing how to choose between pay or save. And then for those of you not in the pickle, we'll look a little bit farther on down the road and talk about what switching away from pay to get forgiveness sooner might look like as well, presuming you're going to reach forgiveness. So, but before we get too far into the future, we need to back it up a little bit, talk about application, what it means to use an income-driven plan, renewing your income information or recertifying, it's often called. And then also we're going to talk about tax returns a little bit. And then there's going to be side effects no matter what you choose to do with your student loans, right? So we're going to make sure you can identify them like you do in your patients and try to minimize those side effects when we do see them. There is just, I've already alluded to this, but there's just a ton of things going on right now. And in some ways, the timing is not ideal in terms of just when you're graduating from school, in terms of trying to rush to maybe grab onto some of these benefits that are expiring. But it is what it is, right? They were going to have to end some of these at some point, and it just happens to now correspond as you're graduating from veterinary school. But it's nice that you actually have some opportunity here, if you're willing to take it on and you're able to take it on with all the other things that you have going on between now and the end of the month, or now and the end of June. So some of the concerns that you submitted, for those of you that submitted those signalment forms, thank you. Those are super helpful, and we pulled out a few cases to illustrate what we're going to talk about tonight. And here's some of those comments. So high student debt, and this is my second career. So one of those things that jump out to me there, second career, you could be one of those people that fall into what we've been calling the pickle, and might even have previous repayment time on loans from before vet school. That's quite likely, right? Which means you could be one of those people who really want to act before the end of this month, right? So the next 5 days, right? Just from that short comment there, that's kind of what's going through my mind, right? Is this a person who might be able to benefit from what's called the one-time forgiveness count adjustment, which is expiring on April 30th? Should I focus on saving, buying a home, paying back loans quickly? Generally speaking, there's not a lot of incentive for you to pay back your student loans quickly, but you kind of want to do a smattering of all of these, right? So all of the above, right? So if you you don't have to choose one or the other, right? Don't take an either or approach. You want to take a comprehensive approach where you're paying back your student loans, you're saving maybe for the down payment on a home. We were talking about this with the CSU students, and because there was at least 2 or 3 comments that referred to death when it came to their student loans. And I was telling them that I think every student debt session I've done where I've asked people to provide information ahead of time, somebody has referred to, trying to avoid dying with their student loans, right? Good news is you're not going to die with your student loans. And even if, unless you are planning a very short existence here, your student loan repayment will end. Again, one way or another, right? You'll either pay the balance to zero or you'll hit forgiveness, right? You're not in student loan repayment forever, which is what that really means. But if you were to die with your student loans, good news, they die with you, right? So you don't have to worry about anybody else having to pay them back. So again, kind of like the adage, all bleeding stops eventually, right? Your student loan repayment is going to end, right? Eventually, right? And most likely with a zero balance, maybe you'll hit forgiveness. Again, either one is fine. Why shouldn't I just pay it off ASAP? Because you're dealing with limited resources, right? And you can take advantage of these income-driven plans, pay a percentage of what your income is. There's really no reason for you to pay more than that. You can use those extra funds to focus on these way more important financial wellness items instead, right? It's a choice, right? You can choose to pay them off ASAP if you want to, right? But if you start cutting into some of these other more critical financial wellness items, you're not really doing yourself any benefit, right? And there's not a huge, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, when you hit a zero balance faster versus later, right? So it's really not that beneficial for you to do that. You let your income decide that for you, right? If you've got a really high income and a relatively low balance, you'll pay that balance to zero as fast as possible using an income-driven plan. If you don't, maybe you're heading into an internship, hopefully residency, whatever your career plans are after that. You kind of want to take a more measured approach, right? So you're not paying more than your income requires you to pay, and you're not digging a deeper financial hole than you might be in already. Dividing my paychecks between savings, loan repayment, 401k, and Roth IRA, right? This is the goal here. You want to figure out a way to do all of the above, and that's where a budget comes in handy. So it's making sure that you have a purpose for all those dollars that are coming in and where they're going on the way out, right? Are they all hitting these types of things, right? Are they hitting your loan repayment? Are they hitting your savings account? Are they hitting your retirement savings, right? They should be ideally going to all of those different things. And then this one we've been talking about, right? That pay-as-you-earn won't be available when I can officially consolidate and start repayment, right? There's still an opportunity there. So we'll talk about how you can do that. We'll take a clinical approach to looking at your student loans. So we're going to do a physical exam and diagnostics. We're going to do some prescriptions and treatment plans based on what we find in there using the VIN Foundation student loan or the Student Debt Center. All right, so first poll here, launch we've got, let me see your graduation date. So let me know when you're graduating here. Excellent. All right, I'm going to share this. So this is great. So those of you that have already graduated or are graduating this month, that's going to be super helpful, right? Just by virtue of the timing that's going on here. Those of you that are graduating in May, June, and beyond, it's going to be a little bit trickier, right? So particularly those of you that are graduating in June, you're going to be really bumping up against that pay-as-you-earn deadline if you're in the pickle, right? So if you're not, then you don't necessarily have to worry about trying to get your loans consolidated or submitted before July 1st in order to try to get into pay-as-you-earn. But the earlier you're kind of graduating in this graduation season, the more flexible your options for getting started in repayment are going to be. But there is still an opportunity for those of you graduating in August at University of Arizona students, most likely, you can still take advantage of some of these things, it's just going to be a little bit more complicated, right? You're just going to have to get really comfortable and monitor that calendar closely. So thanks for replying to that poll. All right, next poll. How many of you filed a tax return for 2023? Right. Cool. Excellent. So I see a majority of you have, right? So 88% of you have filed the tax return. That's excellent. You can use that tax return as the income documentation for your income-driven plan. If you haven't filed a tax return, you still can. You can still voluntarily file a tax return for 2023. If you don't owe any taxes, you can file it past the deadline and you won't be penalized for that. The goal is to have a tax return on file to use as income documentation for getting into one of these income-driven plans. It just makes things a lot easier. There are ways for you to get into an income-driven plan without that tax return. Having that tax return on file just makes that process much more smooth. So if you want to take a opportunity to file your taxes still for 2023, I would do so, right? Otherwise, you're going to have to kind of time your consolidation and things correctly, and depending on whether or not you need to add some loans to it later, you may have to provide the income that you are earning at the time you apply. The benefit of having that tax return on file is that they'll always accept it, right? No matter what you're doing between right now and maybe 6 months from now, if you still have some consolidation activities to accomplish, or you're still applying for an income-driven plan, or at that time, you can still use that prior tax return. Even if you're working in a private practice earning $130,000 a year, you can still use that last year of vet school tax return as that income information, right? So having that tax return on file just makes everything easier in terms of assuring that you can get the lowest payment possible in a plan, maybe like Save or Pay As You Earn. That can be really beneficial in that first 12 months that you're in repayment. All right, so let's talk about the student loan physical exam. So you're going to find a whole bunch of different loans in your portfolio. Most of them are probably going to have direct in the name. So they'll either be a direct unsubsidized, a direct grad plus. You might have some direct subsidized loans from undergraduate school. If you are a career changer and you attended higher education at any point before July 1st of 2010, then you may also have federal family education loans, right? So we want to make sure we identify those if they're in there. Perkins loans are still floating around, so you might find those in there. And then also health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students. Private loans are going to be pretty much anything that doesn't fall into this category, right? So they're usually going to have a bank name associated with them, and they're not going to show up in your federal aid file. If you want to review your credit reports, I would recommend pulling one at least annually. I usually do this when I file my taxes just to make sure I don't see anything I don't recognize on there. But you also want to pull a credit report from all of the major reporting entities, because not all of the different loan types report to all of them. But if you pull the report from all of them, you should see a pretty good representation of everything that should be in your name, open lines of credit in your name. All right, so this is what you all provided in terms of information for the types of loans you have. All right, so pretty typical here. So mostly federal loans, direct loans, some health profession student loans, close to 25%, a little bit of loans for disadvantaged students, some parent plus loans, a little chunk of private loans. Right, so this is pretty representative. The ones that are going to be eligible for income-driven repayment are going to be these purple ones, these blue and green ones, if you consolidate them, but not any of these other ones. Right, so this is where the consolidation loan can be extremely valuable, particularly if you have those health profession student loans. You can consolidate those loans into a new direct consolidation loan and get them into a plan like Pay As You Earn or Save. Same with the loans for disadvantaged student. Those are eligible for to be included in a federal direct consolidation loan. The timing of those can be a little bit tricky. So your loans have to be in a grace period status in order to be included, or some other kind of repayment status in order to be included in that consolidation. Your direct unsubsidized loans usually flip into their grace period within days after you graduate. The health profession student loans can sometimes take a little bit longer than that, right? So if you have the luxury of time to wait on them to officially enter their grace period, great. If not, then you may have to just put a pin in them to add them to your consolidation loan later. Right? So the good news is you can add loans to a consolidation loan within the 180-day period of your consolidation being completed. Right, and that's going to be really important tonight and for your graduating class specifically, because there's going to be some, this is part of the annoying parts of your federal student loans, right? For some of you to benefit from these expiring benefits like pay-as-you-earn being phased out or the one-time forgiveness count adjustment, you may have to start a consolidation now and plan to add those loans in later that you can't add now. Right, so that's going to be the annoying part we're going to talk about more with consolidation. So how do you make sense of all this? Like, how do you even know what profile you're in, or what your income driven plan options are, or whether or not you're in the Pickle, right? This all revolves around the studentaid.gov website, right? So grabbing your student aid data file, I'll make sure that everybody here knows how to do that. And then we're going to put that student aid data file into the My Student Loans tool, right? So let's do that right now. So this is studentaid.gov. You guys should all be relatively familiar with this. This is where you go to apply for FAFSA. This is also going to be where you start your, say, consolidation loan. Or if you're applying for an income-driven plan, you're going to do that here. If you're consolidating, which most of you should be, you can apply for your income-driven plan as part of that consolidation application, right? So consolidation will lead you to an income-driven plan payment application automatically if you choose an income-driven plan to use on your loans once they're consolidated, right? So that's where those options live under the loan repayment tab. I'm going to log in here. It's going to send me a text code. I have to wonder if the Department of Education is ever going to call me and ask me why I'm constantly logging into my account. All right, lots of scary language. You can accept that. That's going to take you into your account. It may or may not ask you to update your contact information. I've been in here so many times this week that finally it's not asking me for that anymore, which is nice, but it's a really important step, right? Particularly as you're moving on from veterinary school, right? A lot of you are maybe going to change to a different email address. You're probably all going to change physical addresses. You really want to make sure that your next address, next email, current phone number is in this system, right? So they can get a hold of you, particularly as they're sending you confirmation documents on your consolidation application, right? So make sure they know how to get a hold of you, right? You don't want to miss that information, particularly because timing is kind of the essence this year when it comes to processing your consolidations and making sure that your loans are being taken care of correctly. On the dashboard here, we don't really have enough information to give us the details that we need, so I'm going to hit this View Details button. That View Details button is going to bring me to the aid summary page, and I'm looking for this Download My Aid Data button, right? This is going to be what allows you to save that ugly looking TXT file onto your device, right? So save that ugly looking TXT file to your device, and that's what we're going to use to upload into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. Right, so I'm going to head there next. VIN Foundation Student Debt Center, My Student Loans is one of the tools that is part of the collection of resources that is in the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center. And it's the one that you're going to want to start with, right? This is what helps you do that physical exam of your student loans, right? So this one, that link took me directly here, but if you go to the vinfoundation.org/student debt center, if you're on the homepage, you can click the My Student Loans link and it'll take you directly to the My Student Loans page. And now, congratulations, all of you are eligible and able to use this I graduated from veterinary school option. Right? Even if you're just a month away or 3 or 4 months away, if you're done borrowing, you can use this I have graduated from veterinary school option. And you're going to take that student aid data file and put it in here. All right, so let me find some of the ones that I saved earlier. All right, so let's do one that's in the so-called Pickle. All right, so this is a 2024 grad. I've got some just descriptors in here to try to remind me how to talk about this one. You'll see your name in there, right? So when you upload it, but we're looking through, we've got 169,000 of principal across 11 different loans, $4,600 of unpaid interest, hugely beneficial, right? So you guys were in school during the pandemic forbearance benefits when interest was shut off, which is one of the reasons why this unpaid interest balance is so low, right? This person's unpaid interest balance would normally be, if they accrued interest for the duration of veterinary school, probably, you know, in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, right? And the higher your balance, the more unpaid interest you would have had. So that is really hard to overstate how beneficial that was in terms of keeping your student loan balances low. We're probably not going to see that same thing for the people that are behind you, right? So the people that are starting vet school, particularly this coming fall, are really going to experience some significant interest accrue while they're in school. So the bonus of graduating in 2024, even though it's a complicated start to repayment, this is probably the biggest benefit of you guys graduating in 2024. Okay, so I'm looking through here in this show details, right? So when I'm on a loan groups tab, I'm going to hit this show details, and this is going to become very, very important, right? And this is where I'm looking for two things. Do I have older loans, right? So I'm going to sort this by loan date. Right, so 2023 is the newest one, right? Makes sense, right? That's when that loan started. You received the first disbursement of that loan. And then I'm looking down through here. So you guys are graduating in 2024. You pretty much started borrowing for vet school in most cases for the schools that have 4-year programs in 2020, right? So anything before then and it has a lower balance is probably an undergraduate loan, right? Undergraduate loans have much lower limits. Graduate school loans have much higher limits. Right, so there's usually a defined break there, right? You'll see when you started borrowing for vet school, anything before that probably is a significantly smaller number, right? But I also see that there's a decent break here, right? So this person probably attended undergrad between 2013, maybe graduated in 2016 or 2017, and then their loans clearly entered repayment at some point, because they were in a repayment plan, revised pay as you earn, before they started borrowing for vet school. This tells me that they have 3, maybe 4 years of repayment time logged on their existing direct loans from before veterinary school. And that's kind of a ding, ding, ding. You're in the one-time forgiveness count adjustment category, which means if you want to try to bank that extra forgiveness time across all of your loans, you're going to have to start a consolidation now. Whether you've graduated or not, you can consolidate these loans that have a repayment plan other than in school. It will receive the one-time forgiveness count adjustment as long as you submit that consolidation before the end of this month, and then you would add these loans to that consolidation after you graduate, and then they enter their grace period. Theoretically, if you receive that one-time forgiveness count on that new consolidation loan and you add these to that existing consolidation loan, these loans should also absorb that 3 or 4 years of repayment time that exists on these older loans. Right? And so you can essentially start repayment with some forgiveness time applied across your entire balance. Right, so this is check 1, right? Do I have older loans? Yes. Check 2, is there a break between when I finished whatever those loans were for and when I started veterinary school, a break long enough to give me at least a year in repayment. In this case, checks out, right? So 2 checks, right? So this puts them in the category of folks who should seriously consider consolidating their loans before the end of this month, right? Before Tuesday, unfortunately, right? So thankfully, we're still doing this tonight before the end of this month where you actually have the opportunity to do that, right? It's a bit of it falls into a category of things that we've been calling the mad scientist option, right? Because normally you're not really able to consolidate your loans while you're in school, but there has been some change within the last 12 months that allows you to consolidate these loans that are not in an in-school status, right? But you want to make sure that you leave these out of that consolidation, because if you include them, there's a chance that your consolidation loan application would get rejected. And if your consolidation loan gets rejected, you can't start another one for another 180 days, right? Which is going to make sure that you don't get any kind of one-time forgiveness count, right? So that's why it's a little bit of a mad scientist kind of risky option, right? And it's not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to get that extra forgiveness time, but if you want to crack at it, this is the only way that you would have a crack at it. So the next thing I'm looking for in here, right? So that was starting on the loan groups tab. The next thing I'm looking for in here is this income-driven repayment eligibility status, right? This is what I refer to as your income-driven repayment plan profiles, right? This particular person is eligible for the old version of IBR, pay as you earn, and the new saving on a valuable education, which was formerly referred to as repay, right? I call this IDR, income driven repayment plan profile 2. This is the pickle, right? If you're eligible for pay as you earn, but you're not eligible for the new version of IBR, then you're in the pickle, right? So, and what is the pickle exactly? The pickle is pay as you earn is being phased out on July 1st, 2024. If you're in it on July 1st of 2024, you can keep using it for as long as you want, right? Why would you want to do that? Because pay as you earn has a maximum repayment period of 20 years to reach forgiveness versus 25 years using the SAVE plan, right? And the people that are not in the pickle, i.e. they're eligible for the new version of IBR, can use SAVE after graduation and switch to the new version of IBR and still get forgiveness of 20 years if they want to, right? So it comes down to how comfortable are you with being in repayment longer versus shorter? And most people prefer to be in repayment for a shorter period of time versus a longer period of time, right? Now, it's great if we can get some numerical support to say, yes, pay as you earn is your best repayment option, right, using the loan repayment simulator, and we'll show you how you can do that, right? So you can compare. It's not a slam dunk. Just because you're in the pickle means you should choose pay as you earn. It may be better for you to still use SAVE, right? But you have to be aware that if you do that, you're not going to have access to pay as you earn, right, after July 1st. Right? So that's what makes it the pickle, right? You've got this very short window of opportunity to decide whether or not you want to use pay, and try to reach forgiveness sooner rather than benefiting from SAVE and being in repayment longer. And, you know, quite frankly, that's not fair, but it just is. You know, this is the one side effect, the downside of the changes that they made recently that I wish they wouldn't have done, right? Taking this particular option away for those folks who don't have another 20-year forgiveness option, I don't think was the right thing to do, but I don't get to make the rules. But I am telling you what the rules are. And if you want to be in, you know, have a chance of reaching forgiveness sooner rather than later, then you would have to use pay as you earn if you're not eligible for the new version of IBR. Right, so this is the pickle, right? So upload your student aid data file into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. If your IDR profile looks like this is the pickle, right? I'll show you what one looks like. That's not the pickle. And
Johnny, before you move on to that, and you might be planning to discuss this a bit later, but we've got a question here about how do you know which is better, pay or save if you are in the pickle?
Yeah, that's where the loan repayment simulator is going to come into play, right? So we're going to run simulations based on what you're planning to do now that you're at graduation, graduated, or will be graduating soon, right? And I can give you some guidelines, but it's really tough. I mean, you really have to input your personal specifics, including your student loan balance, but what you're going to be earning, right? Whether or not you're married, if you're imminently planning to be married, if you have kids or will imminently have children, like all of those things will play into that, and the simulator will factor those out. But when we compare pay as you earn to save in the simulator, that's kind of what we're looking for in that numerical support that I referred to, right? So if I run a simulation and it's obvious that pay as you earn is projected to cost me a lot less than save, then I probably want to try to get my loans into pay as you earn before the phase out date, right? If it's kind of equivocal or save is a lower total projected cost, then don't worry about getting your loans into pay as you earn. It's gone. You're not going to be able to use it, but save is probably going to be a better plan for you. And typical things or things that I've been seeing where pay as you earn is usually better than save is you're kind of in the what I'm going to call middle of the road student debt balance. So this one, right, 175,000, maybe all the way up to maybe, let's say 250, right? These are not hard and fast rules, right? But there just tend to be, where we see the simulations of pay as you earn coming out more financially favorable than save. Once you get above that threshold, right, you're generally looking at save being better for you. So the higher your starting balance is, maybe 250, 275 on greater than that, save is going to start to look a little bit better. And if you're anticipating a longer period of lower income for any reason, right? So internships, maybe a second internship, residency, or that you're working in a area of veterinary medicine that might have an income associated with it that is lower than what is currently the average, right? So equine practitioners start out a little bit lower than small animal practitioners. Depending on how long that you expect that situation to maybe persist, that favors save, right? If you have children now, or you plan on having a family soon and you're going to take some time off and you might not have a robust income for a period of time, that favors save, right? So the higher your student debt balance, the longer you anticipate your student loan balance being, or your income being lower for longer, favors save, right? I've got another example I'll show you here too of somebody who's planning on doing an internship and residency and has a balance that's around 275, right? Internship residency pathways are not only uncertain, but usually come with longer periods of lower income, right? You may benefit more significantly from keeping your loans in save, even though you forfeit that 20-year forgiveness option if you're in the pickle, than using pay as you earn while you're doing that training, right? And we'll talk about why those differences are. But those are just some basic things that immediately come to mind in terms of when people have been posting and running simulations, what tend to float to the top when we're talking about, should I choose pay or should I choose save? Let me go back to, I was going to upload a second example here of somebody not in the pickle and show you what that looks like.
While you're opening that file, we had another question here about when is the soonest I can consolidate, like the day I graduate?
Well, it depends. I mean, so it depends on your loan types, and it depends on whether or not you might need to start your consolidation before you graduate, like we just illustrated with that previous example, right? So if you're not in any of these special categories, right, and we'll cover that too, but if you're not in the pickle, you're not worried about, trying to get your loans into pay as you earn, you only have loans from vet school, or you went right from undergrad into vet school and you don't have any additional repayment time to gain by consolidating before the end of this month, then you can wait until you graduate and your direct unsubsidized loans, or if you have health profession student loans, officially enter their grace period. Sometimes that will happen the day after you graduate. Other times it'll happen maybe by the end of the month for the month that you graduate or the turn of the month after you graduate, right? But it's usually pretty quick, right? So the only times I've seen exceptions to that is for graduates from the foreign accredited schools, right? For some reason, they can take longer for those loans to officially enter their grace period, right? And when I say longer, maybe up to 60, 90 days at most. But most graduates from the US schools, your loans will flip into their grace period, those direct unsubsidized loans, the day after you graduate. But those health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students, if you have them, can take a little bit longer, maybe up to 30 days for those to enter their grace period. All right, so it's we're gonna do the same kind of protocol here. I'm gonna click on the loan groups tab. This person has a little bit higher balance here, loan groups tab, 12 loans. 2023, again, they probably started borrowing for vet school in 2020. Maybe they had some prerequisite classes they were satisfying here in 2019, or it had something to do with their starting of their veterinary school program. But here's another gap, right, between 2019 and 2017. Now, this isn't as big of a gap, right? So 2017 probably finished whatever this was in 2018, right? And then they started whatever this was in 2019, right? This one has an in-school status, right? So it didn't ever enter repayment, but these did, right? These have a standard tenure listed. So at some point they were in repayment, right? So if you have, at least a year of repayment time on your loans from before veterinary school, it's worth considering starting that consolidation of these loans and anything else that you can throw in there, right? So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. This particular person likely has direct Grad Plus loans. Direct Grad Plus loans, even while you're in school, will enter this repayment status, right? But they're still deferred. You don't have to make payments on them, but that also makes them eligible to be consolidated, right? The only loans that you cannot consolidate while you're in school are loans with an in-school status, right? So this particular person, if they wanted to try to benefit from that one-time forgiveness count adjustment, would choose to consolidate all of the loans that have a repayment plan listed here, which would include, and we can check on the loan types, these 2 Grad Plus loans they have from veterinary school. Right, so the higher number of loans that you can get into this consolidation sooner rather than later will help with this process. And then those other loans that aren't eligible to be consolidated yet, right, the direct unsubsidized loans from vet school, can be added within that 180-day window after that first consolidation completes. And the end result will hopefully be a new consolidation loan that has maybe 1 to 2 years of forgiveness eligible time already logged on it for this particular person. Right, and that forgiveness time, the reason why we even talk about this at all is because that forgiveness time is extremely valuable, right? You think about being able to cut off, especially if you're paying based on your income, if you're able to cut off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of repayment time, particularly at the end when your income is likely to be higher, you can save tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on your student loan repayment if you can get that extra forgiveness time on that loan before you even really start repayment, right? So it's worth it, right? But it's really complicated, and it's going to require you to really be diligent and keep up on this, and also keep in the back of your mind, if it doesn't go as planned, you gave it a shot, and then we'll help you kind of pick up and do what's the next best step after that, right? But there's a chance that it might not pan out because we're so close to the deadline here, right? But if you want to give it a shot and you're feeling kind of, able to take that risk on, then go for it. Here, this person is not in the pickle, right? So I call this income-driven repayment plan profile 1. Right? So pay as you earn, saving on a valuable education or save, and the new version of IBR, right? This is what the IDR profile 1 looks like. So this is the most flexible of the repayment profiles. This is the one that allows you to disregard pay as you earn, start with save, and potentially switch to the new version of IBR later on down the road if that still makes sense for you to do so. Right? This is the profile you want to see. Right? If you don't, it's not the end of the world, right? It just makes things a little more complicated. But if you could pick one, this is the one that you'd want to be in. Right? So hopefully you guys have uploaded your file. You have that kind of figured out by now. You're either eligible for the new version of IBR or the old version. They're mutually exclusive, right? It can't be any blend of the two. There is another profile. I don't think I have one. I actually probably could show you one here. That I don't anticipate many of you to be in, but maybe there's a few of you that are, where you're only eligible for the old version of IBR and save. And I call that IDR profile 3. I definitely have a version of that. It's just not a 2024 grad, but I'll show you what that looks like. Yeah.
Tony, while you're pulling that one up, there was somebody that is following along with their own student aid data file, and they said they have multiple repayment plans that are listed as NA. Does that mean they no longer exist?
Multiple that exist. Oh, so that's probably in the loan sim, I'm guessing. Are you running the loan repayment simulator, or are you actually seeing NA in this income-driven repayment, these boxes?
I think I'm wondering if it's under the loan groups, under the repayment plan column. Would that say NA if they were paid in? No.
Down here, you could see an NA, right? So
If they're paid in full.
if they're paid in full and they don't have any repayment plan data, right? But you don't have to worry about the loans that don't have a balance, right? But you don't have to worry about those NAs, right? These loans are not currently contributing to your student loan balance, or they were otherwise consolidated in some other fashion and exist in a different loan, right? But you don't have to worry about these that say NA, right? But this one illustrates what the income-driven repayment plan profile 3 looks like, right? You have access to the old version of IBR, save, right? And those are the only two that you'll see numbers in. If you do have health profession student loans, right, they don't show up in the file, or loans for disadvantaged students, right? You can add them through the add loans feature, right? So if you know all the details, you can add them individually, or if you just know the total balance, you can add the total balance in there. They all have interest rates of 5%. They don't accrue any interest while you're in school or during their grace period. You can enter the loan servicer if you know it. School information, we'll just pick something randomly there. And it'll add those loans into the My Student Loans tool. And when you click on the income-driven repayment eligibility tab, you'll start to see these percentages change, right? And that's indicative of a loan type that isn't necessarily eligible for one of these plans, but would be eligible if you consolidated it. Right, so that's kind of how you can use that to, it doesn't change which plans you're eligible for, it just changes the percentage of your loan balance that's eligible for those particular plans. But if you were to consolidate those health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students with those existing loans, that new consolidation loan would make this 100% in either of these types of income-driven plan profiles, right? It won't change the profile, but it will be eligible for the income-driven plan. All right, so let me, I'm going to come back here, and I think I've got a poll to ask you what your plan profile is. So hopefully that gave you enough time to grab your file, upload it into the My Student Loans tool. I saw a quick I don't know pop up there. So yeah, if you're not sure, right, tell us which part you're not sure about, right? Because it does require you to grab your student aid data file, right, and upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. That's the only way I can really definitively tell you what your IDR profile is, right? We could try to do it with loan dates and things, but it's really inefficient and it's really frustrating, right? So if you can grab that file and upload it at some point here and tell us what that profile is, or ask some questions about how do you figure that out, we can look into it. So here, and this is pretty cool. So, the majority of you that responded here are in IDR profile 1, which is, again, if you could pick one, that's what you want to be in, right? You don't have to worry about trying to get your loans into pay-as-you-earn before July 1st, right? The pay-as-you-earn essentially has no utility for you, right? You don't have to worry about that part. But if you do have some repayment time in the past on your loans, you might want to consider consolidating under the one-time count adjustment still. For the 12% of you here that are, quote, in the pickle, right? That's the most complicated one here, right? You're kind of, identifying those two things we were talking about earlier, right? Now you're in the pickle, right? Do those older loans that probably put you in the pickle, do they have prior repayment time on them where you want to start that consolidation before Tuesday to try to get that added time applied to your starting consolidation loan, right? That's the one that's the most urgent. And for those of you in profile 3, it's an easy decision. You're going to use save, right? And there's really no time constraints for you other than if you have some prior repayment time on older loans that you might have on your ledger, then you can act before Tuesday to try to boost your starting forgiveness time.
Tony, we're getting quite a few questions, so I want to take some time to just kind of clarify a couple of things.
Mhm.
One of the questions is, what is the difference between pay and IBR 2014?
Yeah, there's not much difference between them other than they're different plans and one of them is going away, right? So if you have access to the new version of IBR, again, don't worry about pay-as-you-earn, right? They're
Yep.
basically identical, right? But having access to IBR 2014 means you can let pay-as-you-earn go and still have a plan that's exactly the same as pay-as-you-earn was, and have access to that shorter timeline to forgiveness if you need it, right? It's kind of too soon to tell if you're going to need it, right? But it's nice to have in your back pocket, right? Anybody that's in that IDR profile 1, you're going to want to start with save, right? Start with save. It's the most beneficial plan to start with, right? But it gives you that option to choose to that IBR 2014 later if it makes sense for you to do so. Right. I can't answer if that's going to make sense for you to do so right now. A lot of things have to unfold for you between now and the next 5 years.
That really lets you take advantage of both of those plans, right? Taking advantage
Right.
of save early on, that lower.
Oh. Rebecca, you cut out there. Hello? Hopefully I didn't cut out.
Nope, Tony, you're still there. She cut
Okay.
out for
All
a
right.
second.
Okay. Great.
So
Hopefully.
we'll just we'll work on getting her back.
Okay, great. So now we're going to kind of move on a little bit, let that sink in. I'm going to come back to that stuff when we talk about consolidating in the exact details, but I'm going to move on from that, and maybe this will answer some of the questions about the differences in the plans, right? So choosing a plan, like in what choosing a plan is all about is essentially setting your minimum monthly payment. What do you want your minimum monthly payment to be? Right. And because we see a lot of, people are like, oh, I want to pay $1,000 a month. I want to pay $2,000 a month. I want to pay $5,000 a month. Right. And that's fine. Right. But you first have to choose a repayment option. And that repayment option is going to set your minimum monthly payment. Right. And you have to at least pay the minimum to keep your loans in good standing. Right. And that everybody needs to keep their loans in good standing, right? Because you don't want to put your student loans in a default. That's a really bad place to be. And quite frankly, there's no reason for it to happen, right? You can use these income-driven plans that can have a payment all the way as low as zero, and that $0 payment that you're signed up for and not making still counts towards forgiveness and still keeps your loans in good standing, right? This is why I would encourage you all to use that save or pay as you earn using that tax return that you hopefully filed, right, before you graduated, or that you're going to file here before you graduate. So you can get a very low, if not zero payment. So the minimum is zero, right? Or very low as you can get it to be. You can keep your loans in good standing, and we can start working on our budget and seeing how our student loans fit into our overall financial plan. You could certainly choose these other time-driven plans that are out there. If you don't choose anything after you graduate and your loans and the grace period ends, they'll put your loans automatically into a 10-year time-driven plan, which means they take your principal, the interest rate, and they calculate the amount that's required for you to pay to extinguish your balance in 10 years. Right. So I wouldn't recommend letting that happen. Right. You want to choose a different plan that's going to have a much lower monthly payment. Right. You can see here, depending on what your balance is, right, that 10-year plan payment can be pretty high. Right. And the average that you guys all reported is in that mid 200 range. Right. So you're looking at a pretty stiff payment under a standard 10-year plan. Right. You don't want the minimum to be that. The reason why we don't spend a lot of time talking about the other time-driven options is because they're not forgiveness eligible. Right? The only forgiveness eligible option in the time-driven universe is a 10-year plan. Right? And again, the 10-year plan is not very helpful from a financial standpoint. The minimum is just way higher than you really want it to be, particularly as you're just getting started. Right. So whether you reach forgiveness or not, you want to use a plan that gives you forgiveness credit just in case you need forgiveness. Right. It's kind of like insurance. Right. Now, most of you, right, especially if you're starting with a student debt to income ratio of 1.5, 2 or higher, you're quite likely going to reach forgiveness if you pay the minimum required by your income using one of these income-driven repayment plans. Right? So you want to start earning and banking that forgiveness credit as soon as you possibly can. Right? The sooner you can get to forgiveness, the less you're going to pay, the sooner you're going to be done with repayment. Right? These other time-driven plans, right, they might sound appealing because they allow you to reach a payment of 0, or they they cover your interest each month, whereas the income-driven plans may not. Right? And maybe it feels better to make a payment that covers your interest, but they're not earning you forgiveness credit, and that's a huge drawback. Right? Again, I can't predict for all of you whether or not you're going to need forgiveness, but it's certainly nicer to have the forgiveness credit than not if you need it. Right? So make sure you're earning that forgiveness time. And the only way that you can earn that forgiveness time is by using an income-driven plan.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that because we've we've seen this on the student debt message board so much recently from colleagues that have been in repayment for 15, 20 years and are using those extended or graduated repayment plans. And luckily, because of the one-time forgiveness count adjustment, they're getting the opportunity to sort of do a redo on that. But that's something that you can't get that time back, and it's really disappointing sometimes. So definitely look into this stuff.
Yeah, the do-overs are really rare, right? And there's a really big do-over going on right now. But I can't guarantee that. I would have never guessed that this do-over was going to be possible, right? And so I certainly can't hope that there'll be another do-over in the future, right? So absolutely, right? And that's really why you just want to set yourself up for the maximum flexibility, right? The just in case it takes you longer to get to that specialization than you were expecting, just in case it takes you a little bit longer to feel your way through your veterinary career and find that position that you love and is stable and you kind of know what your income looks like, right? Just in case your family circumstances don't pan out exactly as you predicted, right? You just never know when you might need this forgiveness time. So, start earning it as soon as you possibly can. So this is what the repayment options looked like about 6 months ago. And you're still going to see a lot of this information floating around. But this is when I say this is why this is so confusing, particularly for your class. You're in the midst of this transition period. And this is what is happening, right? So revised pay as you earn has turned into saving on a valuable education. You'll still see the repay language floating around out there, just like I showed you in some of these files, right? So not that one, of course. Let me see if I can pick a different one. this one, right? Wherever you see repay, that now means save. They're one and the same, right? But they have different features, but everybody that was using repay before has automatically been converted to save. And you may even see repay still on some of the applications, right? But repay means save. Pay as you earn and the income contingent repayment, which none of you should be concerned with, are going to get phased out on July 1st of 2024. So if you're not in one of those plans as of that date, you'll no longer be able to choose it. Right. So in one respect, we're seeing things simplify, right? I still think it sucks that they're taking pay as you earn away, but I can't change that right now. Maybe they'll bring it back. Maybe there'll be such an uproar after it goes away that people didn't even really realize or expect it that they'll bring it back. I don't know, but I'm not counting on that. Right now, it's slated to be phased out. And then if you're, IBR 2009 is essentially obsolete with the release of save, so there's no reason to choose that plan, right? So really, you're only left with save, the new version of IBR, and for those of you that can get your loans into pay as you earn, those are your options that are remaining. And we do have this switch too, and I don't, we'll talk about it, but I don't want to focus too much on it because again, it requires a crystal ball, right? It really is going to depend upon what your career looks like 4 or 5 years from now, as to whether or not you should switch. And it's just nice that you have the option if you're in that income-driven repayment plan profile 1. Okay, so how do they calculate your payment, right? So this will get to some of the questions about the differences in the repayment options and what you can expect, right? And why it's so important to have that tax return on file. Right, so they use what's called your discretionary income, and they take a percentage of that discretionary income. Your discretionary income is your taxable income, otherwise known as your adjusted gross income on your tax return, minus 150% or 225% of the federal poverty guidelines. So 225% applies to the SAVE plan, right? 150% is for pay as you earn and the IBR plans. Right, because it's a higher percentage, they're subtracting a bigger number from your taxable income. You're going to pay less using SAVE than you will any of the other income-driven plans. Right, that's one of the reasons why SAVE is generally the most beneficial, in addition to this really special feature called the 100% unpaid interest subsidy. Right, so what that means is when your payment is below the monthly interest that accrues on your student loans each month, the Department of Education covers that difference. So if you're accruing $1,000 a month of interest and your payment is $500 a month, you're short by $500 on that interest. The Department of Education covers that $500, the entire amount. Right, so while your payments are below the monthly interest accrual, SAVE is hugely beneficial. So thinking back to what I was saying before, SAVE favors higher student loan balances. It favors longer periods of lower or no income. This is why, right? This is crazy beneficial, right? For those of you that have a low enough income, your payment will be 0, but the interest is all covered. It doesn't get added to your balance. Right, so when you can use SAVE, you should, right? Because it's that beneficial, right? Now the kicker with SAVE is that for anybody with graduate school student loans, it has a 25-year maximum period until you reach forgiveness. That part sucks, right? It's better to be in repayment for a shorter period of time rather than a longer period of time, right? So that's where the plans with a 20-year max until you reach forgiveness are appealing, but they don't have the unpaid interest subsidy. Right. This is what develops the pickle. And for those of you that will find it beneficial to switch from SAVE to the new version of IBR, you give up that unpaid interest subsidy, right? So hopefully by then you don't need it, right? That your payment is at least covering the interest, right? But it's going to be a tough call, right? That's why it's not automatic in terms of whether you should or will switch from SAVE to IBR. It's going to depend on your circumstances. Right, if you can still benefit from the unpaid interest subsidy, then you're going to stick with SAVE. And the kicker there is when they created SAVE, they set a limit on when you can switch from save to IBR 2014. And that's why we say 5 years, right? Because right now the rules say that you can't have more than 5 years of time logged in save and still be eligible for the new version of IBR. Right? So the longest you can use save is 5 years from now. Right? So before you hit that 61st month, so 60 months is 5 years, in repayment, you're going to want to run some numbers and see if it makes sense for you to switch to IBR. Otherwise, you'll lose the opportunity to do that as well. Right? So some ways it's gotten simpler, other ways it's got more complicated, but you can push that down the road, right? You don't have to worry about that for now, particularly if you're in, like the majority of you are, in that IDR profile 1. You don't have to worry about that switch. You just know that it is a possibility and that you have to check in on that before you reach 5 years to see if you are a good candidate to do that. Okay, so let's say you got $130,000 income. If we subtract off 225% of the federal poverty guidelines, so 15,060, that's the federal poverty guideline in 2024 for a family size of 1 in the lower 48 states. Right, so my discretionary income in that circumstance is 96,000. I take 10% of that, I divide it by 12. My minimum monthly payment, my income requires me to pay $801 per month, regardless of what my student loan balance is. Right, so that's the payment my income requires me to pay. Again, IBR 2009, you guys don't even need to worry about it. It's completely obsolete for you. How much should you pay? Pay what your income requires you to pay. Right, a lot of you, and I don't know if there's some magic reason, but $1,400 a month seems to be something that you guys want to pay towards your student loans. You aren't required to pay that until your tax return showing $210,000 of income, right? When you get there, congratulations, right? Feel free to pay $1,400 a month towards your student loans. But if you're paying $1,400 a month and you're not yet showing $210,000 on your tax return, then you're paying more than you have to, right? You can do better things with that money until you get to that point, right? So that's really what the income-driven plans kind of coach us into, is trying to not pay more than we have to towards our student loans. And if you hit the maximum forgiveness or the maximum repayment period, that's what triggers forgiveness, right? It's not a certainty just because you choose save or you choose the IBR 2014 plan, 4 years from now. It's not a certainty that you reach forgiveness. Right? It's only if you have a balance remaining. And depending on what your income does, you might generate a payment high enough where you'll pay the balance to zero before you reach forgiveness. But if you don't, that's what triggers forgiveness. And whatever is left at that time frame is what's forgiven, and that can be treated as taxable income. However, we do have a special tax exemption in place for anyone who receives student loan forgiveness in the tax years between 2021 and 2025. Now, that's not going to apply to most, if any, of you, although I did find one student who could potentially receive student loan forgiveness this year or next year and would still receive that as a tax exempt benefit. Right, so they do these things. The IRS can do these sorts of things, or Congress can do these sorts of things, where they'll take one specific thing, like student loans, and make them exempt from income taxes if that balance is forgiven. Generally speaking, any kind of debt forgiveness is treated as income, as earned income on your tax return, right? Unless there's one of these special exemptions in place. And what this has done is kind of open the door, at least, to Congress potentially extending that exemption in the future. Right, we'll find out in 2025, depending on the makeup of Congress and the appetite for doing so, whether or not they're going to extend this current tax exemption or they're going to let it expire. Right, but unless you know, whether or not you're going to be tax exempt, if you're projected to hit forgiveness, then you want to plan for it. Right, add it as a line item into your budget. So 20 or 25 years from now, you're not caught with your pants down and the IRS says, hey, you owe us $100,000. Remember those student loans that we canceled? Right, you don't want to have to go raiding your retirement accounts or selling your house so you can pay the IRS for that tax bill. Right, if you start early enough, it's a piece of cake to make sure that you're on track to cover that that tax bill that you may or may not have to pay into the future.
Tony, before we move on too far, I just wanted to revisit the idea of what if you aren't projected to reach forgiveness? Because we have a question here about, can you show an example of students with a 1-to-1 debt to income ratio or lower? Many times she's only discusses the higher student debt load. And can you just kind of elaborate on how using save early on is still going to be beneficial?
Yeah, so absolutely. And feel free. I mean, if that's your circumstances, run that simulation for you, right? I mean, I tend to focus on the ones that have a higher balance because it's more critical financially that they get these things right, because the consequences are more expensive, right? The higher your balance, the bigger the consequences if you don't navigate this correctly. When you have a lower debt to income ratio, you have much more flexibility in terms of how you pursue repayment. And even if you choose a variable pathway, the financial consequences are not significant, right? But you can certainly run a simulation and you'll see how that pans out, right? So I'll just knock this down to something lower, right? So let's make it 100,000, right? Let's assume that you still consolidate your loans. Maybe you've got $130,000 income, right? If you filed your tax return, it'll be zero when you apply. If you're starting your job next month at $130,000 per year, when you file your 2024 tax return in early 2025, it's going to show about half of your planned earnings for that year, right? So your payments, you have the opportunity to allow your payments to kind of ramp up, right? So if we run that simulation, right, you can see that the differences here are not terribly significant, and the time frames are pretty much the same, right? But the big difference is you have an extra $24,000 at your disposal to build an emergency fund, start making sure that you're saving for your tax advantage retirement accounts, maybe saving for the down payment on a home or a practice, building an opportunity fund, so to speak, right? Using that additional cash flow in those first couple of years to boost your overall financial wellness, rather than volunteering to pay $1,100 a month towards your student loans when you could be paying zero. That's a better financial strategy overall. And yes, you may pay a little bit more if you let this run out as we have here for your student loans, but I'm betting that if you're productive with this $27,000 that you have extra in the first 2 years, you'll more than outgrow this difference in your student loan payment, right? But that's up to you, right? You can choose to do that. You can certainly choose to pay $1,100 a month towards your student loans, right? But it's going to be a lot easier for you to build that more comprehensive financial wellness strategy sooner rather than later if you approach it this way versus this way, right? So that, I mean, the income-driven plans, especially Save works really, really, really well for the lower debt to income ratio scenarios, right? It's up to you if you want to take advantage of it, right? I would encourage you to do it, right? I mean, it's kind of in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. It's a financial no-brainer, right? Because there's so much happening as you're getting started as a veterinarian. And we also know from surveys that we've run, you're quite likely to maybe be in a different position than you currently accepted 1 to 2 years from now, right? Which can kind of upend a lot of these strategies. And that's where we end up seeing a lot of our colleagues that we've seen recently that were very well intentioned to pay off their student loans sooner rather than later, and things happen, right? They've switched jobs a couple of times. Maybe that first one wasn't as advertised, or there's somebody there that you just can't work with, or your spouses had to move and change their job, so you had to leave and find another one, right? If you lock yourself into things like this, you're kind of making it harder to maintain your financial wellness strategy overall in favor of your student loans. And there's just not a great reason to do that. And the overall amount that you end up paying, again, is going to be in a pretty narrow window when you have a lower starting debt to income ratio, right? So whether you run to zero or you let your income kind of determine that payment, you're going to end up paying about the same amount, right? So it really doesn't make sense to go that aggressive strategy when you don't have to, particularly in those first 2 years. And the Department of Education is covering your balance. That's what keeps these costs in such a tight window, right? You still end up paying a relatively similar amount because the Department of Education covered all of your interest for the first year at least, if not more.
Speaking of that unpaid interest subsidy, there's a question here about, is that considered taxable?
It's not. So that unpaid, I mean, I've been using Repay since it came out in 2015, and that had a 50% unpaid interest subsidy, and that they covered half of the interest that our payments weren't covering, and now it's 100%, and that number has never been reported to the IRS, and we've never been responsible for paying tax on that. All right, so yeah, whether or not you are going to reach forgiveness is where the simulator comes into play. So let's do one of these other ones, right? So this is a person where it's more likely that they'll reach forgiveness, right? And this is kind of where these debt to income ratios come into handy, right? This was the one that I just ran here was a great illustration of a debt to income ratio that's less than 1. You're not likely to reach forgiveness, but you can still use the income driven plans as a strategic way to pay off your student loans in a reasonable manner and give you some extra cash flow so you can meet other financial wellness goals sooner rather than later. If you have a debt to income ratio that's closer to 2 or higher, like we do in this case, right? This is a person that's anticipating earning $100,000 a year. So let's send that over to the loan repayment simulator. And I'm not even going to account for the potential for them to boost their forgiveness time. Well, we can add that in later. So let's change their graduation month. We'll choose the consolidation option. If you're going to consolidate your loans, choose the one that has consolidation in the repayment plan drop down here. One of the side effects of consolidating is they'll take this unpaid interest and they'll add it to your principal, right? But it's better to do that so you're in save and receiving the unpaid interest subsidy than to not consolidate your loans. One of the things that happens when you consolidate as well is they round your interest rate up to the nearest 1/8 of 1%. This person's unpaid interest or weighted average interest rate, I believe, is already at the 1/8 of 1% level. So it'll remain at that 5.875 most likely. And then you can reduce that using the auto pay feature by 0.25% once that loan is in repayment. So 5.875 minus 0.25. We can update that interest rate to 5.625. Right, we'll assume the user repayment we're starting from 0, but we'll come back and change that, assuming they might be able to navigate this mad scientist stuff. We'll change the income to what they indicated they think their income is going to be. You do want to maybe spend some time with these projections. We put 3.5% in here just to get you started, but that may not be the case for you. You may see your income actually increase more than that the first few years, but then it may plateau a little depending on the service mix at the practice you're working on and how much you're working. But we do know that we can reduce that first and second years if we have that tax return on file. We know that when we file our tax return for this graduation year, it's probably going to show about half of the income that we've earned on an annualized basis because we're nearly halfway through the tax year when you start that job. Family information, if you are married, you can add it here. If you've got dependents, that will play a role. And then if we're going to hit forgiveness, we want to assume some reasonable tax rate, right? We start you off with 30%. You can change this to whatever you want. 30% is probably an overestimate, right? But I'd rather be on the high side than the low side when I'm doing some forgiveness planning. Speaking of how you save for that tax will also influence your overall costs, right? So forgiveness savings. So this is how, what is the return on the dedicated fund or savings account that you're using to cover that particular tax? You can easily get 4% on any high yield savings account these days, if not closer to 5. So again, feel free to adjust that to whatever you'd like. But just running this to illustrate these concepts, right? So again, here we go. We can have a $0 payment for at least the first 12 months, have a very low payment in the second 12 months, right? The higher your starting balance, the more available cash flow you have compared to a standard 10, right? And again, I use the standard 10 as my basis for comparison because it's the only time-driven plan that gives you forgiveness credit, right? Anything that's going to take longer than 10 years to pay back is definitely not going to be comparable to an income-driven plan. So the only time-driven plan that's really comparable if you want to accelerate payment is a standard 10 because it still gives you some forgiveness credit. If you did have to, in case of emergency, break glass, switch gears, you still want to earn that forgiveness credit, right? So that's why I use the standard 10-year a lot as a basis for comparison. Right, so if I keep scrolling down here, it looks like the standard 10-year plan wins, but again, I'm considering that this is over a 25-year period. I'm paying roughly a similar amount. And also, in this particular case, this person is in that IDR profile 1, where they have the option to switch to the new version of IBR. If I use save for up to 5 years and switch to this one, right, my total projected cost will actually be less than this. And I don't know exactly what that number is. We're working on projecting that in the simulation for you, but we don't have that ready yet. But I know it'll be less than this number, which is now less than the standard 10-year plan payment, right, over a 20-year time frame. If you have an opportunity to pay a loan over a longer period of time and pay the same amount or less as you would in a shorter period of time, it's a financial no-brainer to pick the longer period of time. Right? I know it sucks to think about being in repayment longer, but financially, this is a much better move. Right, as illustrated by this effective interest rate, which essentially takes the amount that you paid above what you borrowed, divides it by the amount that you borrowed. So everything that you borrowed above, everything that you paid above what you borrowed, divided by the number of years that you're in repayment. This is how much you paid effectively in interest over that time frame. Right, that's a very, very inexpensive loan, which is why stretching it out longer can actually make it more financially beneficial. In this case, right now, this looks like a no-brainer, right? I'm starting with save. I'm going to probably switch to IBR unless my income appreciably changes one way or the other, right? That's going to be what's on my radar, but I'm going to start with save. And I'm quite likely to reach forgiveness. So I'm going to sneak down to the forgiveness planning module, look at what my projected tax is, right? If I hit forgiveness sooner, that tax is going to be higher. If I stay and save, that tax will be lower. Right? There's another one of those conundrums you're going to have to kind of deal with. Do I want to be in repayment longer and have a lower tax? It depends. In this case, there's a significant enough difference where I probably would try to shoot for the shorter time frame. Right? So I'm going to have to be a little bit more aggressive with my tax planning. But in this case, to cover this $90,000, I need 20 years from now. It's probably going to be a little bit less, but it's a fair assessment for now. I have to dedicate at least $244 into some account that's returning at least 4% per year. And in that case, I've paid much less than the 10-year plan. And I got to keep that flexibility of that lower monthly payment for that 20-year time frame, which gives me a lot more flexibility to reach other financial goals. And I decreased my effective interest rate even lower, right? Because I used the savings over time to decrease. It cost me essentially $58,000 to hit this $89,000 tax target. Right, so I decreased my total cost by another, 20-something thousand there. All right, so depending on what your starting balance is, again, it's going to make sense for nearly all of you, especially those of you that are in that IDR profile 1, no matter what your debt to income ratio is, to start with save. Right, start with save, give yourself a break, build your financial wellness strategy and budget as it exists after graduation. And when you have some stability in terms of what you think your finances are going to look like, then you can reassess, right? But the simulator is kind of what we use to assess those numbers and those options for you. All right, let's talk about public service loan forgiveness because that's a little bit of a different beast. Payable in that context, you're still using an income-driven plan, right? But there's no tax guaranteed, right? So, and this should say save. Sorry, I'll change that. But you're going to want to use the save repayment plan if you're on a path to reach public service loan forgiveness. And what's public service loan forgiveness? It's you working for an eligible nonprofit while making payments to your direct loans using an income-driven repayment plan. Right. So if you do that for a period of 10 years, doesn't have to be consecutive, but the sooner you hit that 10-year time frame, better, you'll have your remaining balance forgiven tax-free. Right. And this is an excellent strategy for those of you that are kind of heading into that nonprofit arena or see yourself staying in there long term. Right. So academic internships, academic residencies. If you're going to stay at an academic institution, maybe a shelter, zoo, aquarium, those sorts of things are all public service loan forgiveness ready type of arrangements. So I would encourage you to, look into public service loan forgiveness. This is, if you run public, we have a way for you to run that in the simulator too. Public service loan forgiveness, there's a switch here for yes and no. Are you working towards public service loan forgiveness? And people that say, I want to pay my loans back as fast as possible with as little as possible, public service loan forgiveness is your answer, right? It's crazy how that pans out. So if I turn that switch on, you pay your loans for 10 years using a plan like Save. I started with $240,000. I paid $67,000 and I didn't have any tax, right, in this simulation, right? So, for those of you that, right, really want to get out of student loans without having to pay as much for them, public service loan forgiveness is a gift in that scenario.
There was a
Never-
question in the Q&A about PSLF. Let me see if I can find it real quick here. From my understanding, as long as 30 hours of your work week are spent in a PSLF eligible position and you're making loan payments, then if you add additional work that's not PSLF eligible, then you're still good to qualify for PSLF, correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So you have to be meeting at least what they define as full-time requirements or a combination of part-time work that meet the average of 30 hours per week threshold. So yes, you can work 30 hours per week as an employee of an eligible nonprofit, earn public service loan forgiveness credit, and then moonlight for a private practice on the weekends or something else. You'll earn more money, right? Which is fine. There's never a problem with that. But the higher your income, the higher your payment will be too, right? So just keep that in mind that the more you earn, the higher your payment, right? You should never be discouraged from earning more money. It's just a reality, right? Because your payments are a function of your income. You have to use an income-driven plan to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. If you earn outside income regularly while working towards public service loan forgiveness, your monthly student loan payment will be higher.
Another question here, would a PhD program qualify for PSLF?
Oh, probably not, unfortunately. Sorry. So the PhD programs are still notoriously excluded from that universe, mostly because of how they're funded. It's hard to be considered an employee in a PhD program because a lot of them are funded via grants and things, and it doesn't necessarily meet the employment standard. Doesn't mean you can't try. You can, it's whether or not you can get the public service loan forgiveness employment certification form submitted and recognized. Right, so you can give it a go, and if you do figure it out, please let us know so we can pass that information along. But I have not yet found anybody that has been able to get a PhD program to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But it does bring up, and I haven't gotten to this part yet, if you're heading into a PhD program soon, right, so you're graduating and starting that PhD program, maybe within the next few months here, then you really need to consolidate your loans. Right, so you may not be able to get public service loan forgiveness, but if you consolidate, end your grace period, and get your loans into Save, you'll at least receive the unpaid interest subsidy during that PhD program, which will significantly decrease the amount of interest that accrues. Right, so you can log some income-driven forgiveness time. It might not be public service loan forgiveness time, but you can log the income-driven forgiveness time and receive the unpaid interest subsidy for Save. One of the biggest issues we've seen with the PhD programs is those folks that graduate and then shortly thereafter start that PhD program and their loans are still in the grace period. Once you start that PhD program, because you're still considered to be in school again, your loans flip back into that in-school status.
And it's very, very difficult to get them out of that for the duration of your PhD, which can be 3, 5, 7, 8 years, right? That's a lot of interest, right? So you really, 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 really want to get that loan consolidated into save before you start that PhD program. All right, so just a few more differences that we can focus on from the income-driven plans. The lowest payment is going to be with save. If your debt to income ratio is low enough, that might even be the standard 10-year plan payment, but not in those first 2 years, right? So again, if you've got that tax return handy, use it, right? So if you can get a $0 payment, a very low payment for the first 12 months, we know that your second 12 months of payments will relatively be low too, because you're starting your job here midway through the tax year, right? That's what allows you that flexibility for that 2-year period at least, right? If you're doing advanced education, it'll be even longer, right? So use that to your advantage. The shortest time frame is going to be pay as you earn, IBR, public service loan forgiveness, right? Because they have the shortest available time frame for folks with graduate school student loans if you reach forgiveness. The best unpaid interest handling is save, without a doubt, right? It's the only plan that covers your interest, right? Which is why it's so valuable. The most flexible strategies, as we've been talking about, but here they are just kind of laid out. Save for up to 5 years, then switch to the new version of IBR. Pay as you earn to forgiveness in 20 years, still a very good strategy for those of you in the pickle. Save to forgiveness at 25 years, there's nothing wrong with that either, right? But I tend to focus on the 20-year ones and the sooner ones because, generally you guys are dying to be done with student loan repayment sooner rather than later, right? But there's nothing wrong with using save. And if it takes you 25 years to hit forgiveness, so be it, right? Nothing wrong with that. If you're going to work towards public service loan forgiveness, use save, right? It's going to have that lowest monthly payment. It kind of hedges your bet too, right? So if you find yourself moving away from public service loan forgiveness, save covered all of that unpaid interest for you. So if you do switch gears and you end up on an income driven path towards forgiveness, it'll minimize the amount that's forgiven. If you do find yourself in a scenario, this is more typical of the debt to income ratio less than 1, folks. You could get to a point maybe in year 3 of repayment where the standard 10-year plan payment might be lower than a save plan payment. You could certainly switch to a standard 10-year plan at that time frame if you want to have a lower payment, or you can stick with save and you'll accelerate your payment even more, right? But the good news is it's still that same percentage of your income. So it shouldn't feel like it's a burden in your budget, right? Because that means your income has gone up, right? So if your payment goes up at a similar percentage, it shouldn't tank your budget. So back to that profile question, right? Hopefully any of you that were in that I don't know camp have had some time to maybe download your student aid data file and upload it into the My Student Loans tool and answer that question. And then we're looking to investigate, like we've been doing in the loan repayment simulator, how does your save payment, your pay as you earn payment stack up against that standard 10-year plan payment? One of the other kind of responsibilities you have when using an income-driven plan is periodically providing your income information. Right. So if you apply for save, graduate, consolidate, apply for save now, right? Next year, around February or so, you'll start getting emails from your loan servicer about renewing or recertifying your income information. Right. And ideally, you have to provide that income information. Lately, it's within 35 days of what they call your anniversary date. Right, the window opens about 90 days before your anniversary date. Right, so there's a defined time frame where you're allowed to provide your recertification information, unless your income has decreased. Right, they will always allow you to have your payment recalculated before you're due to, as long as your income has decreased. Right, the spirit of these plans is to not make student loans an undue burden on your finances. Right, that may sound laughable, but the goal is to have you not paying all or most of your income towards your student loans, because we still want you to be a contributing, functioning financial member of society. right? So if your income has decreased for some reason, even if it's just temporary, you can reapply to have your payment recalculated downward. It'll set that as your minimum monthly payment for the subsequent 12 months. And then the next time you're due to renew, you'll provide that updated income information. Right? But you have to at least provide some documentation of your income annually. If you don't, then your payment will revert to something that looks like a standard 10-year plan payment, right? So it can significantly increase if you're walking around with an average veterinary student debt balance, right? And you generally don't want that to happen. One of the ways you can find your anniversary date is also in the My Student Loans tool. So if I can find my person that had loans and repay previously, we'll see some data in there for the anniversary date field. Right, so this is kind of the expiration date, if you will. The window will open 90 days prior to that date. And as of recently, because the loan servicers are generally terrible, they're asking for 35 days at least to process your information. So you have to provide that annual renewal information at least 35 days before this date. Otherwise, they won't guarantee that it gets processed before your expiration date, which means you could end up in a standard 10-year plan payment type of situation for a month while they process that information, right? That's what you're trying to avoid. All right, cool. Let me come back to that. Skip that for now. I think we're to the consolidation piece now. All right, cool. All right, so let's spend some time here, maybe even just the rest here tonight on consolidation, and depending on your circumstances, how you can navigate some of these more complicated scenarios and also the one that's more straightforward. So should you use a federal direct consolidation loan? Probably, right? I haven't really seen a case yet for a 2024 grad that where not consolidating was a good idea, right? So it's just a matter of which profile, the income-driven plan profile you fall into, and whether or not you have some appreciable repayment time, so more than a year on some older loans, as to when you need to consolidate and how that's going to work for you. So if you have older loans with more than a year of repayment time, right? I know it's going to stretch your brain a little bit to think about that, but you can use you can use that My Student Loans tool to pick through that to see if you have one of those breaks like we see here, right? Is there a significant break? Is there actually a repayment plan listed in there, right? In this case, we know this person had applied for repay. That's the only way you can end up in repay. It can't happen automatically, right? They had to actively apply for this plan at some point, which means we know their loans were in a repayment plan at some point. And it would appear as if it was maybe for 3 or 4 years. Right? I don't know the exact number. Those are hard things to figure out. But once the forgiveness count adjustment is applied, you'll get that count. Right. So this is a person who, again, in my opinion, it would make a lot of sense for them to consolidate at least these loans that are listed in repay. And then after that consolidation processes, add these remaining loans once they're in their grace period to that new consolidation loan. And hopefully that resulting balance will all absorb that 3 to 4 years of forgiveness time that they already have on these older loans, which significantly shortens their repayment time frame, which then you can come over to the loan repayment simulator and say, I've got 3 years in repayment already. And it will adjust how long we run the simulation for and cut your forgiveness time off sooner, which will decrease your costs, right? That's how this all ties together. If you're in the pickle, right, and you want a chance to use pay as you earn before it's phased out in July, then you have to at least initiate a consolidation loan and choose pay as you earn as part of that consolidation application before July 1st. Right now, I don't know. I assume that anybody that applies for pay as you earn before July 1st, even if it takes them longer to process that information and get your loans into pay as you earn, will still be granted access to it. But I haven't seen any language that confirms that, but I have to believe that's how they're going to do it. right? That's kind of how they're doing the forgiveness count adjustment, right? As long as you submit your consolidation before April 30th, they're pretty much guaranteeing you that you'll receive the count adjustment on that new consolidation loan, right? Even if it takes the loan servicers longer to do the processing, as long as you have evidence that you submitted that application before these dates, you should be granted access into them. Now, there's a lot of overlap here. In order for you to be in the pickle, it likely means you have some older loans that probably have some repayment time on them, right? It's not always the case, right? But it's probably the case, right? So there's a lot of overlap between these two. But I also showed you one of somebody that has that income-driven repayment profile 1 and also could benefit from consolidating because they have at least maybe a year of repayment time that they could benefit from consolidating before this April 30th deadline. Right now, if none of that applies to you, right, then plan to start your consolidation after you graduate, right? And those loans enter their grace period, right? But it's these first two that require you to act a little sooner rather than later. Here's where we cover that scenario where if you're heading into a PhD program, you really want to get your loans consolidated, at least the application submitted before you start that program. So you can choose to end that grace period, get your loans into a plan like SAVE, ideally, so it covers the interest while you're doing that PhD program. That's another instance where if you are in the pickle and you're heading into a PhD program, because your income is going to be lower for longer, I would highly recommend using SAVE and just letting go of pay-as-you-earn. Right, you're gonna do better letting the Department of Education cover that interest for that duration of time than you will by having that shorter forgiveness time. But it's your choice. One of the other kind of pitfalls we see happen a lot is those of you that go on to do maybe an academic internship or you start your nonprofit job, maybe June or July, your loans are still in a grace period at that time frame unless you consolidate them and choose to end that grace period. You select the do not delay processing option. And by selecting that option, they will process your consolidation and put your loans into repayment after that consolidation completes. That's when you're eligible to start receiving public service loan forgiveness credit and the SAVE unpaid interest subsidy if you're using SAVE, right? You can't get either of those things to happen when your loans are in the grace period. Even if you're voluntarily making payments to your loans, they won't receive any of those benefits until they're officially in repayment. Right? There's another reason why you want to end that grace period and consolidate your loans. Consolidation is the only way to end your grace period earlier. It also just simplifies your student loan portfolio. You can see these ones that we've been kind of looking through. I mean, these are messy, right? And they get even messier than this. When you start adding health profession student loans or you've got a more complicated borrowing history, clean that up, right? The consolidation is really helpful in cleaning that up. Way more beneficial of having that clean consolidation loan than keeping these loans unconsolidated in this kind of state. And there's more benefits for you to do so. All right, let's talk about actually this count adjustment first, right? So what does this mean? Essentially, it's been floating around out there for a couple of years, but now it's been extended several times, but I think we're finally at the final deadline, right? We're 5 days away from it. And what the deadline is for anybody who has multiple older loans that might have a variable amount of repayment time credit on them, you can get all of your loans to reflect the maximum number of years for that oldest loan or loans in your portfolio by consolidating them together. And they're going to give that consolidation loan the highest repayment time that they find in your repayment history. Right. And that is just, it is, I could never even conceive of something like this happening with federal student loans. Like, it is the ultimate reset button for everybody that maybe chose the wrong repayment plan or has been in repayment for way too long and just wants to be done, and maybe they had a tortured pathway that had them in repayment for way longer than they ever expected. This is the ultimate reset button. But in trying to clean up 30 years of really bad student loan policy, there's some collateral damage and benefit. And you guys are kind of in that benefit category, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense that somebody who's just graduating veterinary school can start repayment with some forgiveness time already logged, but it's on the table, right? So take it and run with it if you can, right? And that means if you have loans with varying amounts of repayment time, consolidate them, try to get your vet school loans in with them so they also absorb that that bonus forgiveness eligible time. The closer you get to forgiveness, the sooner you'll be done with repayment and the less you'll pay, right? So trying to figure out how much repayment time do you have on your loans, it can be hard, right? And that's where Beck and I really try to go through the ones that we identify or can identify before this expiration date to tell you, hey, you've got an opportunity here. It's kind of an educated guess, right? So, but if I see those, like we covered, we see those gaps in your borrowing and we see repayment plan names listed for your loans, there's a good chance that you have some repayment time that you may want to try to take advantage of here.
Tony, I want to touch on some of our most popular questions here while you're jumping in between slides. If you get married and choose to file jointly, would you be able to consolidate both parties' loans into one? If possible, would that be beneficial?
Yeah, thankfully not. Yeah, and no, and it's not. They tried that experiment and it was a colossal failure. They're trying to undo that actually. So there's some special legislation where they're trying to let people who did joint spousal consolidations to undo them and try to get them to benefit from the forgiveness count adjustment. So don't, one, you can't do that, not in the federal system. The only way that you could logistically consider doing that is if you did a private loan refinance, and I would not recommend doing that. So private student loans don't benefit from any of the things that we're talking about tonight. So you don't want to voluntarily give up all of these outstanding benefits you have with your federal student loans and trade them for something that's much less flexible and much more risky.
We have another one here that says, if we're not in the pickle, how quickly do we need to choose a repayment plan? And how do we decide whether to start making payments before the grace period ends?
Yeah, that's an easy answer. Don't, right? Don't make payments to your student loans before the grace period ends. There's no reason to do that, right? And you don't have to rush necessarily, but if you're not in the pickle, you've got no additional repayment time. As soon as you graduate and your loans officially enter their grace period, consolidate them and choose save, right? And if you've got that tax return handy, your payment will be zero or very low. You'll start receiving that unpaid interest subsidy. There's no payment due for you, right? Again, coming back to that concept, don't voluntarily pay more towards your student loans than you have to. There is no reason for you to make a payment during the grace period. Don't do it, right? You've got a lot of stuff coming up here, right? You're going to be moving. Moving is expensive. If you're not getting those moving expenses covered by your employer, you're going to have to cover them yourself, right? Some of you, to the tune of maybe 20%, are carrying credit card debt. Pay that off first, right? You don't want to add to it, right? Just so you can pay towards your student loans, right? When you start your job, right? Again, moving is expensive. You're going to have to, furnish your new living space and get settled in your new, wherever your new gig is. And you're going to start working as a veterinarian, right? And you're going to have to buy things that you probably didn't even thought about yet. You're going to want to start taking advantage of your employer compensation benefits if you're working for a private practice, right? So there's a bazillion of other things that you really should be doing with your income before you even think about paying it towards your student loans when you don't have to at all, right? No payment is due during your grace period, but your grace period is not helpful. You're going to eliminate your grace period by using a consolidation application, get your loans into a plan like Save, using your tax return so the minimum payment is zero ideally. The Department of Education is covering all of your interest. Your loan balance isn't changing, but you're earning forgiveness time. And you now have access to all of that income you're earning to do much more productive things with it, right? That's the goal, right? Don't worry about trying to make payments on your loans during the grace period or before it consolidates, right? That there's contraindicated, right? Is the medical terminology for that, right? There's not a good reason to do that.
There's also some confusion about Grad Plus loans. There's sort of two related questions here. If you have grad plus loans that are in a deferred status, can those be consolidated, or does that have to wait till after graduation? And then some of my loans say deferred, but I've been in school. Why are those loans listed as deferred and not in school?
Yeah, so those are probably grad plus loans, right? So grad plus loans are they're a direct loan and they're eligible for consolidation and they're eligible for all of the income driven plans of public service loan forgiveness, but they're handled differently when you're in school, right? They're kind of either always in a state of deferment or they're going to say that standard 10-year plan, right? Either one of those statuses should make them eligible for consolidation. The only status that's not eligible for consolidation is the one that says in school, right? And that's usually your direct unsubsidized loans that you're using for vet school and those health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students. Those are the only loans that you kind of need to exclude from these attempts to consolidate while you're still in school to take advantage of any of these special benefits. But any status other than an in-school status should make them eligible to be consolidated, right? And when you do consolidate, that's what you're kind of picking through when you're looking at that. And that's great because you're looking at your loan portfolio. And I don't have one here that shows deferment, but you're pretty much looking to include any and all loans that do not show in school into that consolidation if you're doing one of those consolidations before you graduate. Right, so those are the ones that you're going to want to pick through and choose to consolidate.
Someone was asking, is there a way to find out when those loans will go into the grace period?
No, there's not. I mean, you can check, I would grab a student aid data file the day after you graduate. And if you see the status change, then great. If not, I'll grab one, the next few days, see if there's another one. You can log into studentaid.gov and see if you see any status change to those loans. But unfortunately, there's not a way to get notified when not that I know of, in terms of when those loans officially switch status.
And then last one here for just a second. Would you be able to jump back to the loan sim? There's a question here and it's got an upvote. Sort of asking about the income projections. They were wondering, do you have to adjust those manually each year? And then what is it showing for the 24, 25 years there? If you could just kind of explain how all of that works, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. So, you put an income in there to kind of get it started, right? But because these income driven plans are dependent upon how your income changes over time, we have to also assume some change to your income over time, right? And it's, not always accurate or probably never accurate to assume that your income is going to constantly increase, but we have to choose something, right? And that's what kicks it off. And then you can click the button to account for those first 2 years of how your tax returns actually affect your income driven repayment strategy. But you can absolutely, if you open this income projection, you can go in here and change these numbers to anything you think is reasonable for your circumstances, right? After a couple of years, if you decide that, this 3.5% is just too aggressive or it's not aggressive enough, you can change that percentage, right? I will tweak this occasionally depending on what I see and what people are typically doing. If you're paid on ProSal and you're, doing a really good job and you're at a practice that has a really kind of robust service mix where you're doing a lot of maybe say high dollar procedures regularly and your income tends to be much higher than your base, then you can put a higher number in here, right? But these are things that you're going to learn over time, what number goes in here. I would encourage you to kind of look at your adjusted gross income rather than your gross income. But right now, since you guys haven't really had a lot of experience filing tax returns yet, you're probably not going to know what the difference is. Right, so a gross income is fine for now, right? But just know when you start contributing to things like your 401k, or if you've got health insurance premiums coming out of your paycheck, or you have access to an HSA, a health savings account, and you're contributing to those health savings account, those are all things that will subtract from your gross income and generate an adjusted gross income number on your tax return. And because that's the number that the Department of Education uses as a gold standard, if your adjusted gross income is lower than your gross income, then use the AGI, right? And put that in here, right? Because that's what you're going to use when you apply for your income driven plan or you renew your income information, right? So the projections, the simulations will be more accurate if you're using the income documentation that you're actually providing to have your payment calculated, right? But until you have a good feel for what those numbers are, a gross income is perfectly reasonable to use. Just know that it's likely overestimating your total projected costs for when it comes to income driven plans, right? Because your adjusted gross income is likely to be lower. That shifts when and if you get to maybe practice ownership, right? So sometimes that can get more complicated. But for the time being, as you're getting started, right, we use the button here that simplifies those first 2 years, and then start looking at what your pay stubs are showing you and how they subtract from your gross to get to an income that they actually tax you on, right? What I call your taxable income, which is also something you can use instead of your AGI if your AGI is too high compared to what your pay stubs are showing, right? So you want to look at your options that you can use to provide income documentation and use the one that's going to be most beneficial, the one that's going to generate the lowest minimum monthly payment, particularly if using a forgiveness eligible plan. Hopefully that makes more sense, right? But yeah, I mean, the further away we get, the less confidence we should put in these later year projections, right? And truth be told, if you look at how the income profile pans out for most associate veterinarians, it increases relatively steeply in the early years, it plateaus, and then it may even decline a little bit as you kind of back off and you're not, operating at 125% capacity and in a production-based model, right? But maybe at that point you choose to do something else. Maybe you specialize in some other skill set and you're doing predominantly one thing or another, or you take on practice ownership or something else, right? So, but for now, again, to just give you a look at how this could pan out, plug what your gross income is in there, use the reduce first and second year reduced income button and adjust from there. Are we kind of clear on consolidation, right? Because that's the one I wanted to make sure we really hammered, right? So how that works, how that should work, you feeling kind of comfortable, confident with the the deadlines and what it looks like to try to consolidate your loans if you're not yet graduated, but think you can try to get some additional repayment time. How are we feeling about that?
I think there's some confusion about like if you had undergrad loans and maybe never were paid on those, should you consolidate? That seems to be a pretty common question. So maybe we can kind of revisit the idea of like what should be consolidated early.
Yeah. So if you have like here's the probably the more typical circumstance, right? You went into undergrad, used some undergraduate student loans, and then went directly from undergrad, right? You graduated whatever that May was, and then you got into vet school and you started vet school in that August. You're not going to have any additional repayment time to gain, right? So if there's no break in your borrowing history, right? There was no opportunity for your loans from undergrad or from whatever you did before vet school to enter repayment, then you're not going to have any additional repayment time, right? Even if you voluntarily made some payments somewhere along the way there, that's not going to count, right? Your previous loans would have had to exhaust their grace period and officially entered some kind of repayment status for you to have some eligible repayment time, right? If you went directly from undergrad into vet school, then you don't have to worry about the deadline on Tuesday, right? But you could still be in the pickle, right? Where you might want to try to get your consolidation application submitted by before July 1st if you want to use pay as you earn, but you don't have to worry about trying to consolidate your loans before Tuesday. If you do have loans that had some repayment time greater than a year, right, and you're feeling fairly confident about that, then start a consolidation loan that includes all of the loans that are eligible to be consolidated, right? So anything that doesn't have an in-school status, submit that consolidation loan before you graduate, right? That consolidation loan should process within the next 30 or 60 days, right? And then presumably you've graduated by then. You can add your remaining loans to that existing consolidation. So here, we'll head back to the student aid website. So there's a special process for adding loans to a consolidation. So this is where you would go to start your first consolidation application. If you need to add loans to it, I would use the paper direct loan add loan application, right? It's right here, right? So again, it's not, they're going to make you earn this, right? But it can be well worth your time, particularly if you've got, 3, 4, 5 years of repayment time logged on your previous loans, right? So that's a lot of savings on the table and a shorter duration to forgiveness, right? So that's what I would do, right? If I was fairly confident that I had repayment time in my history, right? If you don't, or you don't want to worry about it, and you just there's no way that you're going to be able to do this consolidation stuff before Tuesday, and then make sure that you submit this consolidation add loans paper application within 180 days of your initial consolidation, then forget it, right? Don't worry about it, right? You can consolidate your loans after you graduate normally, right? And choose the repayment plan that's best for you, right? So probably save. But again, if you want to try to get into pay as you earn before it's phased out, if you're in the pickle, then you're going to have to do that consolidation at least before July 1st. Right? Those are the options and the challenges facing your particular class. Right? So this just describes that process a little bit more directly in terms of consolidating your loans while you're still in school, if you need to do that before Tuesday. But again, don't feel like you have to do it, right? It's just one of those things that, if you want to, go for it, right? And we'll help you, on the student debt message board area. Let me gives me an excuse to show you that. So if you're logged in while you're using the student loan tools here, the Student Debt Center tools, you'll see a link to the student debt message boards. And many of you have already either requested an anonymous post of your signalment form, and we're working on those. But this is where they end up, right? And there's also thousands of these posts in here. So if you want to kind of see how some of these people are handling some of this stuff, we have replied to some 2024 graduates who are both in the pickle and can benefit from the count adjustment. It kind of outlines that process in a little more detail within those discussions, right? So any of the ones here you see with the 2024, you'll have to kind of scan through them and read them, but you'll see pretty quickly if it's one of those folks that were counseling through that mad scientist option, or the trying to get their loans into pay as you earn if they're in the pickle. All right, already did that. All right, how we doing question wise?
Nothing about consolidation, but some of our most popular, or actually someone just sent one in. I'm in the loan consolidation application. It's allowing me to include loans that are marked as in school on the VIN website. How do I manually uncheck those school loans and only include the undergrad loans?
I believe you should be able to exclude any loan that you want to from that consolidation application, but I have heard that that from some other people in the message board area, that they automatically pull in those ones with the in-school status. I think it's kind of risky to try to submit the consolidation with those loans in it. I think there's a better than average chance that it could end up with the consolidation application being denied, and that's probably the least favorable outcome. So I'm pretty sure you should be able to just exclude those loans from that consolidation. So I'm not sure the exact process for doing that, but if you see them listed there, I'm hoping that there's a minus option or a way to remove a particular loan from a consolidation.
Got a couple questions, some upvotes here. I'm married, but my husband will be making considerably less than me after graduation. While I'm using save, should I always file separately?
It depends. If your spouse is making considerably less, then you may not have to file separately. You may be fine just filing jointly. There might not be a significant difference, at least in those first 2 years, in terms of your monthly student loan payment. Right, where we see people where it's more beneficial for a couple to file separately is if the spouse has a better than average income, but also does not have student loans of their own, then it can make sense to file separately, right? It really depends on what the resulting monthly student loan payment difference would be if you count your spouse's income versus not counting your spouse's income. So, and again, it's really hard to work with subjective measures there, right? It would be much better to know what that income is. But let's say your spouse's income was $30,000 and you filed a joint tax return before graduation and you didn't have any income as a fourth-year veterinary student, you're still going to have a payment of zero, right? So it doesn't make sense to file separately in that scenario. If your spouse is earning $30,000 a year and you're starting a job earning $130,000 and your 2024 income is going to show half of your income, so 65 and 30 of your spouse's income, 95, right? Is there an appreciable difference between that $95,000 saved payment and a $65,000 saved payment? There might be, but probably not, right? You may still find some benefits filing jointly there. But when you get to that third year after school, right, now we're talking, it may be different, right? It depends. So every year you're going to kind of have to measure those and see if it makes sense for you to file separately or file jointly. And what determines that is how much does it cost you and how much are you giving up in tax filing benefits to file separately, and how much do you gain in student loan payment savings, right? They have to justify each other, right? If you're not gaining enough in student loan repayment savings to justify the costs or the loss and benefits of filing separately, then you don't want to file separately.
Got another one here. I have undergrad loans from 2004. Does it have to say repay to be eligible for this consolidation opportunity?
No, absolutely not. Right. If you have undergrad loans from 2004, then you probably have a decent chunk of repayment time on them if they still have a balance, right? We were just using that as an example, right? This can say any number of things, right? It can say deferment, it can say extended, it can say graduated, it can say IVR 2009, right? It can say anything but in school, and it can be included in that consolidation attempt. And if you still have a balance from 2004, I mean, again, you're kind of like, it's amazing. We keep kind of finding these unicorns. Like I, found a third-year student that has 25 years of payments on loans that they had before they started vet school. I mean, if they can cram as much of their vet school loans into a consolidation here before Tuesday, they can start repayment with 75% less of their student loan balance. Right. So to me, that's what we're looking for, right? I mean, that is like again, you're kind of one of those unicorns, right? You could end up with 20 years of forgiveness time if you get this executed correctly, which means you'd be done with repayment really, really fast. Right. So
means everyone else will be very, very jealous.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, go for it, right? I mean, that is worth, even if it doesn't go as planned, I mean, you're no worse than you were before you knew about this, right? So go for it, please. I mean, holy cow, right? There's a lot of potential benefit on the table there.
Someone asked, what if you're able to start making payments that cover the interest in the SAVE program, but previously were not able to make payments? Does all of that interest get added back?
Oh, yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. So please, again, this kind of falls into that. Here, let me go to the top repayment mistakes. So unfortunately, the way that the unpaid interest subsidy is set up. So if your, monthly interest is $500 and your payment is zero, if you pay $500, you essentially wiped out the unpaid interest subsidy, right? And you didn't make any progress to your student loans, right? It literally vanished. It was wasted money. Right? So while you're using save and you're receiving the unpaid interest subsidy, so that's this middle point here. Do not pay more than the minimum, right? You're going to end up wasting your money, right? Again, this kind of comes back to I get it, I hear it. You guys want to make payments during the grace period. You want to make payments when your student loan payments are zero. You want to make payments while you're receiving the save unpaid interest subsidy. The system is not set up to incentivize you to make extra payments. In many cases, you flat out end up wasting 100% of that attempt, right? You've got way better things. And when I say that, this is exactly what I mean. You have way better things to do with that money, right? Get your loans into save, let the Department of Education cover the interest, and do those other things with your money. Stop trying to fight your loans or circumvent the benefits that are baked in there, right? They sometimes feel counterintuitive, and I really feel like I can make some progress if I pay some extra towards my student loans, but you may just see that money vanish, right? So, it just literally doesn't pay to try until at least you're clear of that unpaid interest subsidy. And even then, you probably still shouldn't be paying more than your income requires you to pay. I get it. Someday, maybe somebody will be able to explain to me what it is exactly that is like people just can't do that, right? They just physically, with the fibers of their being, aren't able to just pay what the calculated payment is for an income-driven payment plan. They want to pay more than that, right? But it doesn't make sense financially. You're going to end up paying more than you have to. If you really want to do something extra with that money, put it in your retirement plan, donate it to the VIN Foundation. We'll figure out a way better way to use it, right? But if you're going to put it towards your student loans, there's a good chance you're going to end up wasting a lot of it. And I don't, there's not a lot of good reason for you to waste your money that way. I can think of more fun ways to do it, but not that way.
Along the lines of paying more than the minimum towards your student loans, we've got someone here that says that they are profile 1, their balance is $250,000. They're in an internship and planning for residency. Is it wise to pay the balance down by $100,000?
One, how? 2, no. So if you're heading into an internship and then plan for residency, you're looking at a below average pay, right? That means your payment's going to be very low, right? With a balance of $250,000, you're going to have a high interest accrual per month. Using save will make sure that your balance doesn't grow, and you'll log forgiveness eligible time, right? So no, it doesn't make sense for you to try to reduce the balance by $100,000. Let your income, your internship income, your residency income, and then after you finish that training, your specialty income determine your payment, right? It does not make sense to try to pay that balance down before you actually see that pathway through, right? Getting residencies is extremely difficult. Internships, not so much. Residencies, extremely difficult. Right? It may take you a second internship. It could take you a third internship. You may bail on the whole residency thing altogether, right? So please, this is not the time to focus your finances on. And if you've got $100,000 sitting around, save it, because you may need it to help you navigate that advanced training, right? Don't put towards your student loans, particularly when it's not required, and the Department of Education is going to do an excellent job covering your interest for you while you're working your way through that experience. Yeah, please don't do that, right? That kind of falls into the category of people who are working towards public service loan forgiveness that are paying extra towards their student loans, right? It just there's some things that just don't make sense, right? And for you guys right now, paying more than your income requires you towards your student loans doesn't make sense, right? And if you want to explore that further, please post on the student debt message boards, and we can keep going through case examples, and we can show you through the simulator and talk about other things that you can do with that money that'll way increase your return and build your overall wealth and putting it towards your student loans, right? It's really hard to do on the fly here, but if you kind of need that assistance to illustrate that for you specifically, are happy to do that, right? But I mean, right now, those types of things just aren't the things that make sense for you to do with your money.
Got another one here about I've heard some academics, depending on how they classify you, would make you exempt from public service loan forgiveness. Is this true? Looking at rotating internships, specialty internships, residency, and fellowships.
Yeah, so that's a complicated answer, and there's not a straightforward answer to that. So yes, depending on how, not necessarily how they classify you in your residency, it's whether or not the person who oversees that and verifies your employment is willing to consider you eligible for public service loan forgiveness based on the definitions on the form. Right. So when they read through the form and you have to have somebody there that verifies your employment with them, if they're not willing to consider you a quote employee, then that's what tanks your ability to receive public service loan forgiveness progress during that residency. In my opinion, all of those residencies should be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. It's just a matter of whether or not you find the person who's willing to consider you an employee. Right. So if one person says no, shop it around and see if you can find somebody else that'll say yes. Right. I think they make too big of a deal between, whether or not you're technically defined as an employee and how public service loan forgiveness defines an employee. But the physicians, everybody that's doing a residency in the medical realm figures out a way to get public service loan forgiveness credit. It's kind of silly that we can't get that same consistency for veterinary residencies. So thankfully, I'm seeing more of those residencies qualify and be eligible, but it's still kind of up to you to find that person that'll kind of sign off on your eligibility.
One more question here, and then I'll let you finish up before we get to the rest. Half of my vet school loans are in repayment for IBR 2009, but I haven't graduated yet. Is this an error?
No, I don't think it's an error. I think that maybe some of your loans were in a repayment status for some reason, right? I can't think of any reason why they would have. Again, you can't usually automatically end up in IBR, right? You have to actually apply for it to even be considered for it. So that's one of those where I would kind of raise an eyebrow and be like, maybe you have some eligible repayment time on your loans. So we would have to probably see your file to better assess that. But that one kind of smells like you might have some prior repayment time that you might want to consider consolidating before Tuesday. Oh, great, thanks. I can uncheck the in-school loans. Cool. But the undergraduate, I'm just kind of reading in the checkbox here, so I'm guessing that person is providing that update. But the undergraduate loans are labeled as SULA eligible. What is SULA eligible? That is a subsidized utilization. So those are subsidized loans. So those are your undergraduate loans. That's what determine you have a specified period of time where they will remain subsidized, right? So during vet school, they probably didn't accrue any interest, but if you were to pursue maybe another graduate education, at some point that subsidized eligibility would run out. So that's what I forget exactly what SULA stands for, but it's subsidized utilization. I forget what the LA is, but that's great that you were able to include those and exclude the ones with the in-school status. All right, let's see. I'm just gonna go through the questions here, right? So, and I think that, and then we'll kind of, if you have any other questions, add them, and we'll kind of end this. I see that, we've got some people that are sticking with us, which is great. So I will make sure we get through these questions here. So just to clarify, the unpaid interest you save is not taxable in the present, but may be taxed at the end of the 25 years. Now, Amy, the unpaid interest is not taxable at all, and it doesn't get added to your balance. That's what makes save so great, right? It covers your unpaid interest. That amount is gone from your balance, right? You will not have to pay tax on that, right? So what is remaining at the end, it would save would be your principal, and there would be no unpaid interest, right? So that's what when I talked about earlier how you can you'll have a lower amount forgiven using save. That's one of the reasons why, right? Is because that unpaid interest is not, you're not responsible for it.
And that is unique to save, because with the other plans that don't have that 100% unpaid interest subsidy, that unpaid interest can grow over time throughout repayment. If that's
Right.
still there when you reach forgiveness, then yes, in that case, that would be considered taxable. But that's, again, like Tony was saying, one of the unique things about save that makes that plan so beneficial.
Right. Absolutely. So if I have one subsidized loan that is in deferment, but has NA as the repayment plan from 2017, will that count towards the one-time forgiveness? I'm struggling with how it can say NA and deferment simultaneously. Right? So it would either say deferment or NA. I'm not really sure how it would show both, unless you're saying it's in deferment as in you haven't had to make any payments while you're in school on it. But I would also wonder too, if again, you're kind of reading a loan that you may have had in the past. Where's that one where we had? I thought I had one here that no longer has a balance, right? So that one I'd have to look at your loans. That one doesn't make sense to me just based on that description. If my undergraduate loans are labeled as IBR 2014, then they are not in the grace period. Correct. Labeled as IBR 2014. If they're labeled as IBR 2014, so again, a little more specificity would help, right? So if you're seeing that in the repayment plan column and it says IBR 2014, then that would imply to me that at some point your loans were in the income-based repayment plan before vet school, right? But if you're talking about the income-driven repayment eligibility here in IBR 2014, that's a separate. This is what defines the plans you're eligible to use. When your direct unsubsidized loans switch from in school to the grace period, this will actually say grace period, right? This repayment plan in this repayment plan column, right? It will no longer say in school, actually say grace period, right? So that's kind of what you're looking for if you're waiting for those loans to officially be in their grace period. But yes, whenever you're submitting the consolidation application, you definitely want to select the do not delay processing option. That you always want to select that option. Is there any possibility that save program could be tossed and this unpaid interest could come back? Yeah, potentially. Yeah. So so repay became save and we tossed pay as you earn, right? We could see a future change that converts save to something else or creates a different plan that maybe does something different with unpaid interest subsidy. But right now, these are the rules that you have available to you. So use them, right? Use them to your benefit. Hold on 1 second, I got it. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that, the unknown, and I would worry more about the known, right? So we know that if you put your loans into save, you will receive the unpaid interest subsidy. I can't tell you if save is going to change or go away, right? Just based on past history here, it's likely that we'll see some changes, right? But I don't know if those changes are going to be more beneficial, less beneficial, equivocal, right? We'd have to wait to see what those changes actually are. But in the meantime, if I've got a plan on the table that's going to cover my interest for the first 12 months at least, I'm going to use it. Right. So, the history has kind of shown us that there really hasn't been any negative repercussions to those changes other than this complicated phase out we've seen with pay as you earn. So I'm going to confidently use save and take that unpaid interest subsidy for as long as I can get it. Oh, great question. So how long will you have access to these tools after graduation? Well, we need to maintain a VIN subscription. You do not, right? So thanks for bringing that up. So we need you to have a VIN username and login so we know we're helping veterinarians and veterinary students, right? And VIN does a phenomenal job at making sure that only veterinarians and veterinary students are getting through the door, right? So even if you don't maintain your VIN membership after graduation, although everybody that's going on to do academic internship and residencies, that's still free for you. But if you don't maintain your VIN membership or your practice isn't paying for it, your current username and password will still get you access to the student debt message board area and your student debt message board discussion, right? So you don't have to have a paid VIN membership to have access to the student debt center tools or the message boards. The student debt center tools is freely available to anybody, right? But the access to the message boards is restricted specifically to veterinarians and veterinary students only. And that's how we maintain that access is through the VIN username and password. Is there any risk to consolidate before Tuesday if I have old loans but do not fully understand any of this? I am the one who has loans from 2004. I was hoping to figure this stuff out after graduation, but you said I may be a unicorn, so now panic. Well, I didn't mean to panic you, but again, like that, post your circumstances on the message boards, and if we can try to get to it before the end of the weekend or before Tuesday, we can try to talk you through it. But if you have a loan that still has a balance from 2004, chances are it has repayment time, right? And if you try to consolidate that loan with maybe a Grad Plus loan or whatever other loan you have from vet school that doesn't show an in-school status, and it doesn't work, and it gets kicked back to you, then you're right back to what you were planning on doing before you heard any of this, right? And you can do that as soon as you're able to pursue that consolidation application after that, right? So yes, it'll maybe sets back the time frame of when you can get your loans into repayment. But when I put those two things up against each other, having potentially 20 years of eligible forgiveness time versus maybe not being able to consolidate my loans for another 6 months, that 20 years is worth a hell of a lot more than the potential side effect of that consolidation loan being kicked back to you, right? So it's kind of like a real rudimentary risk cost benefit analysis there. And just on the fly here, you've got way more benefit that outweighs the risk if this can go correctly for you. So I would give it a shot, but they're not my loans, right? So you don't have to do that. But if you want to try it, we're happy to try to talk you through it. It's just, you're running out of time. So, and that part sucks. I wish we would have been able to give you more time to sit on that. And we had some more, cases to show you that panning out, but we just don't have that luxury of time in that case. All right, so I think that I'm gonna, you guys will all have access to these slides. So the ones that we didn't get to, you can click through. Again, the message boards is the best place to find us right now. We're gonna play, as Rebecca said, we're gonna try to prioritize those ones that have that urgency to consolidate maybe before Tuesday, and then the rest we're gonna try to get to, ideally before you graduate, or at least before the pay as you earn phase out date, right? So only if you're kind of in that, really urgent before Tuesday, are we going to try to get replies to those that have replied or requested a post and analysis, and then we'll kind of move on to the next deadline, which is that pay as you earn phase out deadline, and hopefully get all of those questions answered for you, so you have a little bit more confidence on how to approach repayment. So that's the goal, right? Is to make you a little bit more comfortable with this stuff, as you're working your way through repayment. But just know that there's just tons of benefits out there for you. Again, I was really reluctant on whether or not we were going to even talk about that one-time forgiveness count adjustment, but just in the last week here, I've seen so many students and soon to be graduates that can benefit from this. It's like, please just give it a shot. Let's see what happens, right? Because I think some of you are going to be, pleasantly surprised by the outcome. All right. Not seeing any more questions in here. Thank you, Rebecca, for jumping in and answering a lot of those questions and bringing the ones that I forgot to the forefront. And thanks to everybody who stuck it out. You know, another marathon student loan playbook. And please, you know, feel free to reach out. I know I really do want this to be simpler, I promise. But I mean, the last
Yes, we do.
the last 3 years has been nothing but changes and curveballs and, you know, complicated and everything. And hopefully we're going to get to something that looks like a new, simpler normal sometime soon. But this year I just knew it was going to be at least the worst that I've seen. So in terms of just the complication level and trying to make it, you know, somewhat understandable. So we'll do our best to try to keep weeding through it and you know, helping you understand your options along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody was wondering if you're still talking to the third year
Yeah, no.
class at CSU.
No, I drove up there this morning and I drove back this afternoon. So that was a quick, you know, a quick trip for me. So no, I'm not still there. So
Funny thing is all three of us are trying to lose our voices, so I'm not sure any
Yeah.
of us will be doing much talking tomorrow.
no, tomorrow's gonna be a tough one. So cool. Well, thanks everyone again, and thank you, Rebecca, and thanks Jordan
Yeah.
if you're still hanging around on the call. But yeah, so
Yeah.
let us know what we can do to help.
Just a crazy time, and for sure let us know. Feel free to, you know, reach out to us. Like Tony said, the message boards is the best place right now. That's where most of our attention is. If you have other questions and need help with that, you feel free to email us at studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. And then we're going to try our darndest to get this recording processed and out sometime tomorrow, hopefully in an email. So it'll be the recording, Tony's Prezi, and some other helpful information as well. So check out your inbox and look for that coming from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. And congrats, everyone.
Yeah,
You're
right.
graduating your doctors.
Yeah, congratulations. And then, you know, when you get the slides, click on the financial wellness one. I almost never make it to that, but that's what you really want to focus on, those things, right? So focus on the things that are in that financial wellness set of slides that are in there.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Yep.
Tony.
All right. Good night. Thank you all.